My name is Paul Kozak, and this is my final assignment for First Nations Métis and Inuit Perspectives class at Mohawk College. There are many Indigenous communities around Canada, each with unique history and each facing unique challenges today. However, there is also much shared history that will overlap in all. It is important to learn the history of the area you live in. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, which means that I live on the traditional lands of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the settlers to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Union. To begin to understand First Nations Métis and Inuit perspectives, it's important to understand some history first. For this presentation, I will look at only one current issue that's local to me, and that's the issue of land rights. The Haudenosaunee people originally lived in what is today northern New York State. During the American Revolution, the Crown and the Haudenosaunee were allies. Many Haudenosaunee warriors died protecting the Canadian border and would stay and fight even after Crown troops retreated. As a thank you for their wartime service, the Crown awarded the Haudenosaunee a tract of land in Canada. The Haldimand Tract is a strip of land that runs the length of the Grand River and is 10 kilometers deep on each side. What followed, however, was the attempted genocide not only of the Haudenosaunee, but of all Indigenous people who lived in Canada. The Indian Act put into law the second-class status of all Indigenous citizens based solely on race. As intended, it took the legs out from underneath Indigenous people, making sure that they could not grow economically, spiritually, or culturally. This document was meant to make being Indigenous so difficult that they would have no choice but to abandon their lives and give in. Next were the residential schools, the first of which was established by the Anglican Church in Brantford, Ontario, right on the very land which they were promised safety. Indigenous children were forced into re-education camps designed to kill the Indian in the child. However, they went much further, as up to 50% of the children sent to these schools did not survive or were never seen again. This system, for generations, destroyed Indigenous communities and individuals. Generations of children grew up without the love and support of their parents or community, and those that did survive were released into a settler world that still did not accept them. However, they had lost all ties with their family and culture, so they were left in a no man's land. This mutilation was fully backed and supported and enforced by the law of the land. As for the land they were promised, to this day they have only received less than 5%. The majority of the land was held in trust by the Canadian government, and all proceeds were to go to Six Nations. There are to this day billions of dollars missing from these accounts. Six Nations people have for many years tried to access their money, but have been blocked. Much of the funds were not collected in the first place, and what was collected was used by the government for land development and infrastructure in other parts of the country. So this was all to put into context the local issue of Six Nations land rights. Lands that were given in compensation for all that was lost in the service of the British during the Revolution. If these people seem angry to you, that's because they are, and they should be. For generations, their community has been systematically destroyed. Today, many Indigenous live on the brink of poverty, with worse schools, worse healthcare facilities, and sometimes not even safe drinking water. They are still being treated as second-class citizens. If you were in their position, if you were facing your children growing up in this situation, and the government kept taking from the 5% that you have managed to hold on to, one more acre, and the government also owed you billions of dollars, wouldn't you stand up too? This wampum belt depicting two parallel lines was one of the first treaties between our two nations. It means that we each have our own river and our own canoe. It means that we both have autonomy to govern and provide for ourselves. Over the last many years, settler Canada has polluted the Indigenous river and seriously damaged their canoe. All they want now is for us to go back to our river and leave them the resources so they can repair what we have damaged. There have been some positive steps made recently. For one, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This document emphasizes the rights of Indigenous people have to live in dignity, to maintain and strengthen their own institutions, cultures, and traditions, and to pursue their self-determined development, in keeping with their own needs and aspirations. Secondly is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the 94 calls to action that address the ongoing impact of residential schools on survivors and their families. They also provide a path for government and Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to create a joint vision of reconciliation. However, without actions, both of these documents will remain nothing but nice words. For my personal pledge to truth and reconciliation, I will continue to educate myself and those around me on Indigenous issues. I will not perpetuate stereotypes in my conversations or observations. I will find ways to address the Indigenous-related myths and misconceptions of my fellow Canadians. I will support local Indigenous initiatives like Land Back Lane, financially, materially, or in any way possible. To conclude, not a single one of us alive today is responsible for the misdeeds of our ancestors. However, we all now have a choice and a responsibility to make better choices ourselves and to leave things better than we found them. I want a Canada that I can be proud of, and that starts with truth and reconciliation.